The shrill buzz of David's phone cut through the quiet darkness like a siren. It was nearly 12:47 a.m., and the screen flashed with a name that made his stomach twist: Linda, HOA president. For a moment, he thought it had to be a mistake. No one sane called at this hour unless it was an emergency. Half asleep in a guest room at his brother's house, 3 hours away from home, he hesitated before answering. David! Finally! Linda's voice screeched through the receiver before he could say a word. You need to drive back right now. There's an issue at your property, and I need your house keys immediately. David blinked, confused. Linda, it's almost 1 in the morning. I'm out of town. What's going on? Her tone sharpened. There's a delivery truck at the community gate, and the driver says he's supposed to drop something at your address. It's blocking the entrance, and I can't get in or out. This is your responsibility. Get over here and fix it. David sat up, trying to process her words. That doesn't make sense. I didn't order any delivery. Just tell the driver to leave the package. Linda cut him off. I don't care. You're the homeowner, and the HOA rules state you must be reachable at all times. If you don't handle this, I'll be forced to take action, serious action. Her voice carried that smug tone David knew too well, the one she used to intimidate anyone who dared question her authority. But this time, something inside him snapped. Linda, he said firmly, you're out of line. It's the middle of the night, and this isn't my problem. You can't threaten me because a truck is blocking the gate. A cold silence filled the line before she hissed, we'll see about that. Then came the click of disconnection. David stared at the dark screen, heart pounding. Was she really serious? He turned on his email, only to find a message already waiting from the HOA board timestamped just minutes earlier, accusing him of disrupting community operations and refusing to comply with emergency directives. He couldn't believe it. The audacity, the timing, the manipulation, all over a supposed delivery that wasn't even his. It was more than just harassment, it was control. Linda wanted obedience, not cooperation. As David lay back in bed, wide awake, a grim realization settled over him. This wasn't the last call he'd get from her, it was just the opening shot in a power struggle he never asked for. And by morning, he decided, he was done playing by her rules. When David woke the next morning, his phone was already buzzing. 5 missed calls. 3 voicemails. And a string of new emails, all from Linda and the HOA board. He rubbed his eyes and opened the first one. The subject line read, Urgent, Negligence Report. His stomach tightened as he read the message. Linda had written a dramatic account claiming that his failure to respond to a community emergency had endangered residents and blocked first responder access. She had copied the entire HOA board, the community mailing list, and even the property management company. To make things worse, her version of events painted him as careless and uncooperative. David listened to the voicemails next. Linda's shrill voice filled the room. David, this is Linda again. You're in violation of multiple HOA clauses. If you don't comply immediately, I'll be forced to fine you daily until you do. The second message was even more unsettling. We've contacted a locksmith to gain entry to your property since you're refusing to cooperate. Expect the charges to be added to your account. David froze. A locksmith? Without his permission? She was trying to break into his home. Fuming, he grabbed his laptop and opened the HOA's bylaws. If she was going to play this game, he'd make sure she played by the rules, all of them. As he combed through page after page of legal text, one thing became clear: Linda's so-called authority had limits. She could not enter a resident's property without written consent or a safety inspection order, neither of which applied here. But as David kept reading, something else caught his attention: a section on financial transparency. It required quarterly expense reports and receipts for all HOA spending. Yet, when he searched the shared community drive, the last financial report was from 8 months ago. That was odd. Linda had recently boasted about hiring a new landscaping company and funding security upgrades. None of that was listed anywhere. Curiosity turned into suspicion. David requested the HOA's expenditure statements under member rights. The treasurer quietly forwarded him a few documents, and what he saw made his jaw drop. Multiple checks had been issued to L. Jennings Consulting, Linda's own company, labeled as community maintenance reimbursements. David sat back, the pieces clicking together. This wasn't just harassment, it was a cover-up. Linda was abusing her position to funnel HOA funds into her own pocket. For months, everyone had whispered that she was too controlling. Now David knew why. She wasn't protecting the neighborhood, she was protecting herself. And after that humiliating midnight call, he vowed she wasn't going to get away with it any longer. The next HOA board meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening in the community clubhouse. Usually, it was a quiet affair, a handful of residents, stale coffee, and Linda controlling every discussion like a courtroom judge. But this time, the tension was different. Word had spread about the midnight incident, and several homeowners showed up, eager to hear what would happen next. David arrived 10 minutes early, carrying a manila folder full of documents, phone records, email printouts, and something Linda didn't know about, a recording of their late-night conversation. He took a seat in the front row, calm but alert. He knew Linda would try to twist the story again. As the meeting began, Linda's tone was her usual mix of arrogance and forced politeness. "Before we move on to the landscaping budget," she announced, "I need to address a serious issue involving one of our residents, Mr. David Carson." Murmurs rippled through the room. David didn't move. Linda continued, "Due to his negligence, a delivery truck blocked our main gate for nearly 40 minutes, endangering residents and delaying an emergency vehicle. This is unacceptable behavior, and the board will be voting on sanctions tonight." That was her mistake. She assumed David would stay silent. He stood up slowly, his calm voice cutting through the chatter. "Actually, before you vote on anything, I think everyone should hear the full story." He pulled out his phone and hit play. The room went still as Linda's shrill voice echoed through the small clubhouse speakers. "You need to drive back right now. You're in violation of HOA rules, and if you don't obey, I'll take action." Every word was crystal clear. Several people exchanged shocked looks. When the recording ended, Linda's face was pale but furious. "How dare you record me without consent," she barked. "That's illegal." David held up the HOA handbook. "Actually, it's perfectly legal in this state if one party consents. That would be me." Gasps filled the room. Linda fumbled for control, but the board members looked uneasy. One of them, the treasurer, quietly asked, "David, do you have anything else to present?" He nodded and opened his folder. "Yes. Evidence of financial misconduct. Multiple HOA payments made to a company owned by Linda Jennings, without board approval." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the residents in the back row leaned forward. Linda stammered, That's a misunderstanding." But no one was listening anymore. The treasurer immediately called for a financial audit. For the first time in years, Linda's power over the HOA was cracking. And David, calm and determined, knew this was just the beginning of her downfall. The fallout from the HOA meeting spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Within 48 hours, whispers turned into phone calls, and phone calls turned into formal complaints. Several residents contacted the county's homeowner oversight office, forwarding David's evidence and demanding an investigation into Linda's conduct. For the first time, the all-powerful HOA president found herself cornered. David hadn't planned to take things this far, but once the county attorney's office requested the HOA's financial records, there was no stopping what came next. A week later, investigators showed up at the HOA's administrative office. They arrived quietly, no sirens, no warning, just 3 officials with clipboards and a warrant for all financial documentation over the past 2 years. Linda tried to play it cool, pretending it was routine verification. But the moment the investigators began cross-checking receipts, her calm facade cracked. The numbers didn't match. Payments labeled as landscape improvement were traced back to L. Jennings Consulting, her own company. Security patrol reimbursements went to her personal bank account. Even HOA meeting refreshments, supposedly bought for community gatherings, were charged to a luxury catering service she owned under a different name. David learned later that the total amount misused exceeded $25,000. What began as a petty act of harassment had exposed a full-blown embezzlement scheme. When the board was summoned for questioning, most members were stunned. The treasurer confirmed that Linda had restricted access to all financial statements, claiming it was to avoid confusion among members. That lie had worked for nearly 2 years until David's midnight call pulled the first thread. The county issued a formal suspension of Linda's authority pending the investigation. Furious, she confronted David in the community parking lot one afternoon. Her tone was venomous. "You think you're a hero, don't you? You ruined everything, for what? Some power trip of your own?" David didn't flinch. "No, Linda. I just stopped yours." A week later, sheriff's deputies escorted her out of a county office after she was charged with fraud, misuse of HOA funds, and unlawful entry onto private property. The very same woman who once barked orders at homeowners now sat in a holding cell, silenced, powerless, and publicly exposed. When news broke across local media, residents flooded David with messages of thanks. Some admitted they had endured Linda's bullying for years but were too afraid to speak up. David had never wanted revenge, just fairness. But seeing justice finally catch up to her felt like closure he didn't know he needed. Months passed since Linda's dramatic fall from power, and the neighborhood had never been quieter or more peaceful. The once feared HOA meetings now ran like clockwork, without shouting, threats, or surprise rule changes. For the first time in years, homeowners actually attended with smiles, coffee cups, and ideas instead of anxiety. The air of tension that used to hang over the community had lifted. Linda's trial concluded with a guilty plea. She was sentenced to community service, restitution payments, and a permanent ban from serving on any homeowners association board in the state. The local news stations ran short segments about the HOA president who went too far, and though the story faded from the headlines after a few weeks, the scars she left behind in the community ran deep. David, however, refused to let those scars define them. When the board offered him the position of president after Linda's resignation, he politely declined. "I'm not interested in power," he told them during the special election. "I just want this neighborhood to feel like home again." Instead, he proposed something different: a homeowner transparency committee, an independent group that would audit HOA finances, review policies, and act as a voice for residents. The idea was met with overwhelming support. Even longtime skeptics applauded the change. By spring, every major HOA decision was posted online for members to review, and quarterly community meetings turned into genuine discussions instead of staged performances. Neighbors who had once avoided each other started to reconnect. The Thompsons, who had received fines from Linda for having unauthorized garden gnomes, began hosting backyard barbecues. The elderly couple down the street, once threatened over a paint color violation, were now helping organize a community garden. The fear was gone, replaced by laughter, friendliness, and mutual respect. One quiet evening, as David sat on his porch watching the sun dip below the rooftops, he thought back to that first midnight phone call. It seemed almost surreal now, the arrogance in Linda's voice, the way she had tried to intimidate him into submission. That call had sparked chaos, yes, but it had also sparked change. His phone buzzed again, but this time it was from a neighbor sending a photo of kids playing by the new community park, a park the residents had voted for together. David smiled. For the first time, the HOA truly belonged to the people who lived there. And that, he thought, was worth every sleepless night.